Thanks everyone for joining this session. We'll get everyone in from the lobby, so it's fine. Thanks for joining the Microsoft Fabric for Not-for-Profits, the transformation and potential for not-for-profit institutions. I am Greg Brown, Head of Sales and Client Partnerships and Antares. Today we're going to be joined by one of our Fabric thought leaders from Antares as well as Microsoft, and go through bit about the challenges facing NFPs as well as the way Fabric can come to the table, and that solution can offer a lot of benefits for NFPs. In a data-driven world, a lot of NFP institutions are collecting lots and lots of data and obviously swimming in information across many different places. So today's session is really going to be how Fabric can come together as an all-in-one analytics platform, but also give you that sort of capability of managing and delivering critical data services to your organization, to your NFP, to various other stakeholders, all within a framework, a cost model, and feature set and feature-rich platform. In today's session, I'll do a few introductions. We'll go through a little bit about understanding Fabric and the advantages of Fabric. We'll talk a little about security measures in this ever-compliant and strict world we live in. Governance and compliance is important, so making sure that's covered off, as well as then also a little bit around sort of Fabric and Copilot, the next evolution of how we take data into the AI world. We'll also then talk a little bit about how to get started on the Fabric journey for your NFP, and we'll do a little bit of Q&A for those on the call who will no doubt have some questions or potentially need a little bit of input and advice along the journey. So as we go through it, our speakers today joining me are Essen Naidoo, the Azure Tech Lead for Social Impact, and from Microsoft, Jordan France, also from Microsoft, Data and AI Technical Specialist in the Tech for Social Impact space and vertical, and Martin Merrick, Antares Data and AI Fabric Specialist. So quickly, just a little bit about who Antares are as an organization. We are a Microsoft solutions partner who drive digital transformation across organizations, and we look to ensure that we lead with data-driven solutions, and we have that focus on empowering business with the Microsoft Cloud. We cover three capabilities, and I'll touch on this slide briefly, but it's an important slide to understand, and I'll set the context a bit later, but this is obviously important for understanding us as an organization as we work across modern work, data and AI, application development. We often cover and uncover a lot of the different areas of your organization, and we are often talking to various stakeholders in and throughout your organization, so we get a good understanding of the challenges that face NFPs and a lot of the employees, frontline workers, in delivering critical programs out to the public. We're a company that doesn't start from scratch, so we make sure that we bring in the benefit of our knowledge accelerators. Our key focus is really around delivering the benefit of the IP that we've gleaned over many, many years, and that IP comes through to you in the form of accelerators, advanced packages, those sorts of things that help you get up and running faster for less investment. And that's important in the NFP world, in how do we do more with less spend up front. And as I mentioned, our pedigree is sort of quite deep. We've been around for 17 years. We've developed that intellectual property across working with different SMEs. That NFP is one of our key focus areas in government and enterprise. We have those package frameworks, and we're strategically aligned with Microsoft. We are a Microsoft pure play partner. That means that we focus very, very much wholly and solely on the Microsoft stack and all the capabilities it brings to the table. We're also founding partner of the Cloud Collective, and the Cloud Collective is a unique alliance of 4 particular partners that come together. So if you haven't worked with Antares, chances are you've worked with one of our Cloud Collective partners as well. And together, as an alliance, a strategic alliance, we are 4 Microsoft solutions partners that covering all end-to-end stack of the Microsoft 3 cloud journey. So everything from M365 through to your Teams, telephony, meeting rooms, as well as Dynamics 365 and change and adoption, as well as everything that we bring in Antares through data and AI, modern work and apps. So it gives you the benefit of working with an Australian-based, ANZ-based local partner that brings you the capability of a global systems integrator, but you're working with 4 very distinct companies who all have their expertise in their own areas. And we front together as one, and we work together as one. And to yourself, dealing with the Cloud Collective, it's a seamless partnership that works in the sense that you don't need to worry about if there's something that a particular area is being stretched, or we need a specific area of input from, say, cybersecurity. We just simply bring in our friends at Quorum who'll be able to provide that thought leadership and answers. To give you some background around what we do over the years, we've been working with a lot of different not-for-profits and different other companies and enterprise as well, but I've just listed out some particular companies from small to large, but more importantly focusing on a lot of NFPs in this slide. And our expertise is not just on data. We work with a lot of different NFPs around their modern work capabilities, information architecture, records management. We work with custom apps and building custom apps for researchers, working closely with NFPs for research grants and funding. So when we take that level of expertise and understanding of the different areas of need within the NFP organization, we're able to really understand data better. And so rather than bringing just a single view of data and a single lens of what data may do for your organization, we're able to really get deeper and understand what do the employees, what do the execs want, who needs what data. And our experience tells us that employees, volunteers, frontline workers, the research teams, third-party organizations, regulatory bodies, all need something different from your data, all need something different in terms of doing their work and doing their work efficiently and effectively. So whether it's executives who want verified, timely access to data, be it in different channels and mediums, be it in different devices on the go, being able to manipulate that data, be it in Power BI or in Excel, right through to the third parties and government bodies and compliance organisations who need that critical reporting on some of the programs you're delivering to the field, and those sort of areas of real, true, meaningful impact. We see that there are different needs, different areas, different ways. Some overlap, some are unique, and no two organisations are often the same in some of these areas. Yes, some all have the same regulatory report requirements, but often how to get that data is not the same. Where it lives, where it exists, there are challenges. So whilst we understand what the end users need and what the overall NFP requires and not-for-profit organisation needs in order to work efficiently and effectively and do more with the investment of donor funds, we also understand some of those challenges and barriers which NFPs face. And what we typically find is that data can be siloed. It can be large data sets, they can be small, they can be disparate, they can be in different source systems, some SaaS, some on-premise, some legacy. Connectivity cannot always be that simple in terms of, exposed, fully mature APIs. So the integration piece becomes a challenge where we know that we know the data exists, but how do we get it out? How do we get it out in a timely fashion? And then how do we actually share that across the business units in a way that makes sense, without having to do all the manual manipulation and wrangling out data? We don't often see that a lot of organisations have that clear single source of truth. As much as it's a utopian goal, there's always challenges around that single source of truth, because source systems, various target systems, aren't always kept in sync as cleanly and as neatly and as efficiently and accurately as they should. The time to process that data becomes a little bit more challenging then as a result. We need to take the data out of this source system, we need to throw it in the spreadsheet, we need to pass it around 3 hands, and it comes out in a position where we hopefully feel that everyone's done their job right and that data is accurate enough. And a lot of organisations we see are encountering that problem. And there's also then unique reporting. Various NFPs have different compliances that they need to submit to and comply with, including health records and those that touch over those services. There are others that are looking at delivering better reporting around some of the critical care packages and funding programs they're delivering out to remote areas. Whole different complex set of unique report requirements that come out. So those are important to understand as well. Naturally, along with all of that comes the compliance and governance, the lineage. How can we trust this data? Where is it sourced from? How do we know how it's transgressed and progressed through our environment? And how do we know that we can actually sort of sit there and say this is verified, trusted data, and it's all the way along the lines it's got that lineage, especially when we're dealing with health records, and some NFPs do. Important to know, what we're doing with, those sort of critical health records as well. So, those things become important, the oversight and the insight into your data landscape, as well as the data retention. We have to maintain these records for this long. Those records can be destroyed after this much. We need to actually secure and back up these sorts of types of records, as well as team chats, etc., related to these types of client cases or programs we run. So all of that leads to a bit of a challenge around how do we start, and that's a big barrier for entry into the proper data mining, data landscaping, and data transformation from many NFPs. So we see that upfront investment around just understanding where to start, also the cost versus the need for criticality around those data reports and the data improvements. That business case sometimes isn't clear, but a lot of NFPs know they need to do more, and how do they find the money all the way to do it? And the specialized talent gaps as well. So as NFPs, we don't have the option to go away and hire a team of 3, 4, 5 people to run a data platform and to do all of this. Over time, as we grow as NFPs, absolutely, we can start to make those investments where it makes sense and the business can see that it's an important investment. But a lot of the times we're trying to do more, we're trying to run faster with less. So we need to understand the way that we can do that best, and the ongoing operations costs. So how do we look at, doing this in a way that doesn't blow our spend when it comes to infrastructure cost, services cost, those sorts of things. So luckily enough, Microsoft's been working really hard in the background around their product offerings. Fabric's come to the market late last year, and Fabric as a SaaS-based platform provides you the ability to look at moving more of those operational costs into, OpEx, having that consistency around your capacity allocated at your sort of SKU level. That means that, you can set your pricing. The system is smart enough to work with throttling and smoothing those requests. So you pay for a certain amount of capacity per month. Your bill is predictable. You have the capability of having the platform features and capabilities at your hands without worrying about how do we actually then forecast what might happen if we have a spike on a particular day. Microsoft's got that covered with smoothing and throttling, and the conversations that we can take offline and have later if anyone's interested. But it's important to know that these sorts of platforms now, as Microsoft's moved into this evolution of Fabric, has really allowed us to be able to look at going, okay, for many NFPs, you can actually run a modern data platform without the need to have a supporting team of 3, 4, 5 people across various workloads looking after the underlying infrastructure. All of that's taken care of by Microsoft. And so essentially, you become into a more of a pure play SaaS product, which allows you to actually really deliver better with better predictability and no need to make those large scale investments. And the people that you have within your data team are able to actually really get into the meaningful changes in your organization when it comes to data transformation. So that's where Fabric comes to play. And it's a good time for me to hand over to Marty, who'll lead us through the next slides and talk a little bit more about Fabric and how Fabric will come to the table to meet some of these challenges and how it can solve that. As we go through the session, we'll then hear from Microsoft, and then we'll land on the final offer from Antares. So hang around for that, where we talk about how to get started on this journey, and we'll do a bit of Q&A as well for those. With you, Marty.
Thanks, Greg. So welcome, everybody. My name's Marty. I'm a senior consultant with the Antares Data and AI team. And my background is software engineering, data science, and my remit here at Antares is to help customers, adopt a better, essentially a better approach to their data management. And I do a lot of data assessments, try to understand, what are the needs of the business, how does that tie back to challenges around the technical components? And what I often come across actually with NFPs is it's a lot of technical debt, so a lot of legacy systems that are difficult to access or integrate into one another. And so I just wanted to expand on some of these challenges that Greg has already mentioned, because it's a real key, I guess, component of why Fabric becomes so valuable. So as I said, working with NFPs and doing these data assessments, often what comes to surface is, hey, we've got all these reporting requirements, but none of our systems or very few of our systems have the capability for integration. And so, a lot of that data movement is handled manually. I see a lot of Excel reports, and when it comes to aggregation or, summary type reports, that's also done through a sort of manual process. So what ends up happening in that sort of environment is that the reports or the data that you're manually handling are often inaccurate, which causes problems around your decision making, but it also causes trust, so data trust issues in the organization. So, when you have data assets that are not trusted, it becomes very difficult to move towards a well-managed data environment. So essentially, these are the sort of things that we try to uncover in these data assessments, and then provide better processes, governance, and tools and approaches using, of course, Fabric to make your life better in the long run. One of the things that I often get asked is, why a data lake? So there's been a sort of traditional approach for many, many years around data warehousing. Data lakes really solved a couple of key issues. One of those is the ability to actually ingest data from almost anywhere, right? So typical sort of traditional data warehousing meant that you had to go through a very strict process of, extraction, transform, and load. And that meant that you really had to provide a structure around your data up front, right? So it meant a lot of work up front, making that barrier to entry very difficult for a lot of organizations, particularly smaller organizations. So Data Lake just provides a more flexible way to move towards a unified data management system. It allows us to hook into or integrate into multiple systems across the organization. And I'll talk about how to even do that with some legacy systems where we might not necessarily have access to the backend database or an API integration. So, we can overcome those challenges as well. But also it's the whole purpose around data lakes is to simplify how you manage and secure that data underneath as well. So whilst we're pulling in data from across the organization, we want to have an overarching governance and security approach. And really what we want to move towards is this democratization of data. So what's democratization of data, you ask? Well, it's essentially providing data domains for different business units that are now basically are accountable for those data assets. So often what we see is data being handled by the business, but then when problems arise, inaccuracies or additional reports are needed, or something has to change or happen with that data, it's often pushed back to IT, and IT generally are under-resourced to be able to handle those requests. But ultimately what we want to move towards is business owning their own data, so being accountable for those data assets, and the IT departments really supporting those data assets from a platform perspective. So I'll talk a little bit about that later as well. And ultimately, faster time to value. So, building a data lake means that you can move towards a unified data management system much, much faster than you traditionally could with a data warehouse approach. And you can essentially, the idea is you can ingest from any source, but then really only apply the structure or the work that's needed to the parts of that data that are critical to you now, right? And then you can expand on that later on. So it becomes an easy and fast transition into a platform. The second big question I get asked is, well, why Fabric? There's Databricks, there's all sorts of other things, Synapse. So to me, Fabric is really, it's a vertex of all of the solutions that Microsoft have been providing in the past, which have been very, very good, like Synapse. But Synapse was a PaaS. It required some work to set up. There was some infrastructure that you had to set up from an Azure perspective. And what Fabric does is really merge those worlds together, where it's just providing a SaaS-based platform that's really, really simple to provision and then to manage as well. So if you're familiar with Power BI, essentially it's extended how the Power BI workspace approach, where you've got dedicated workspaces for different maybe business units or workloads, and Fabric really just expands on that idea by providing all of the additional tools that are required for your data management underneath. So rather than having two platforms like Azure Synapse and then Power BI, it's now merged into the one world, making it super simple to manage and to work with. I wanted to just talk about a little bit about how all this is set up. So it's important to note that traditionally you may have used maybe Synapse or Databricks in the past. You may have used Data Factory for your data pipelines, essentially assembling those processes of ingestion and pulling data in. And now, as I said, all of those components are now under the one umbrella called Fabric. We've got obviously a Data Factory component. All of the traditional Synapse components that were in Synapse are now pulled into Fabric as well. And of course, Power BI. Now, from a Power BI perspective, we also have some extended capabilities there, which I'll talk about a little bit later. But one of the main ones there is the semantic model and the ability to actually now build reports within the workspace itself, removing that reliance on Power BI desktop, which in some cases made it a little bit more difficult for people to develop their own reports from a business point of view, right? Now, all of the data assets underneath are now unified into what's called OneLake. And OneLake essentially provides, you almost call it a OneDrive for data lakes. It provides a centralized storage approach whereby you can either ingest data from various sources using APIs or various connection methods and pull that data into OneLake. Or if you already have some data lakes, or you already have some storage like Amazon S3, that you don't necessarily want to replicate, you can just use a shortcut, which essentially just points to those data assets, and you're able to use them through the Fabric interface, just like if it was sitting in your OneLake environment. All of that is then managed by one security, which I'll talk about a little bit later on in more detail. But essentially, the key idea is all these components are under the one umbrella, making it super simple to manage from a business point of view, and really opening up the door for the business to be able to use this platform with less technical know-how than previously required. So I'll talk about the sort of different personas and where they sort of fit in. So the way that Fabric really approaches, and what I like about their approach here, is that they've made it really simple to identify, okay, who and what type of persona is using it, how can they use this platform, right? So they've provided a way for you to be able to select that kind of persona-based approach, whereby obviously you're providing, as the screen shows, data engineers the ability to build data platforms, use Synapse, various data engineering activities, use notebooks, use analytics. All that type of data engineering work is provided through a data engineer's lens in Fabric, right? So it really abstracts usage away from the business user and provides them with just the capability that they need without making things complicated. So we start off with the data engineers. The data engineers obviously provide the data pipelines and the ingestion process to pull that data in. We then move to data scientists who can use that data to create custom models. So this is probably a little bit more advanced than what most NFPs might be at this stage, but I have worked with NFPs and education organizations that have moved to this domain where they've pulled their data in, they've established a really good framework around how they do that, how they cleanse and validate that data, and then they're able to actually get some insights that they weren't able to before using some data science approaches. So creating predictive models, and using that data in more effective ways than before. Then we also provide the capability for data analysts to then leverage those models or leverage that data that has been effectively pulled into the platform through Power BI. Now, the important thing here is that these data analysts don't necessarily have to have a lot of technical knowledge. They can effectively use traditional SQL or T-SQL to analyze that data, or they can use Power BI as they have before. So, we can provide them with the tools, depending on their level of expertise. And as I'll show later on as well, Copilot makes the usage and the reporting around Power BI even more powerful. But the key idea here is that we're essentially surfacing the data, providing some structure or a common data model on top of that data, or a semantic model, and the data analyst can really just play with those abstractions there and utilize Power BI to surface insights for the business. And then last, we've got data citizens. So data citizens, we can obviously control the governance around who's got access to where, but ultimately we want to be able to provide them with the insights around the decisions that they make in the business, right? And this is where, again, coming back to data assessments, whilst I do these data assessments, these are the key points we try to identify. What are the decisions that you have to make? How do you make those decisions? What are the conversations you have around data? Where's the data lacking when you have those conversations? And then we essentially build solutions around that by backtracking this process, right? So where does the data need to come from? How do we make sure that that's quality data, validated data, and then we can surface these solutions to data citizens. The last piece here is a really interesting one. So Data Activator now provides us the ability to build things where, we might have a weekly report that data citizens might go to just to check on things, right? So it might be, how many sales have I made this week? Or, it might be anything, but the point is, you need to go to that report to extract that data every single time, right? So you might need to monitor that on that sort of manual basis. Now, Data Activator allows us now to create a solution where that if something occurs in our data set, so let's say you make a new sale happens, and you monitor for that as a rule, you can create a rule that then notifies specific data citizens or specific users in the business to say, hey, this has occurred in your data set. So you no longer have to manually go to a report. It can actually notify you when something changes. And then, of course, you can go to that report and look at the details. So it creates a different approach to handling and serving insights to the business. Just quickly, I don't want to go too technical here, but one of the key elements that has also changed in Power BI, which drastically changes the landscape around how you use Power BI, is this new mode called Direct Lake. So if you're familiar with Power BI, there were two sort of form approaches prior, which is direct query. Essentially, it meant that you got access to the latest data in your data set or the source of that data by essentially running that query every single time from the report and pulling the data in. It meant that it was real-time access to the latest data, but often can be slow because that query needed to run on the source every single time. Then we had the import mode, which whereby we would import that data into Power BI, which would be very fast, but of course that had to be refreshed, every so often. So you're always a little bit out of sync. So for real-time requirements there, it wasn't suitable. Now, essentially, Direct Lake brings those two worlds together, making it super fast and super efficient without having to actually pull that data in directly into Power BI. So now we can create solutions that are real-time or near real-time, but without the overhead of what we had previously. Now, one of the key things here for us as Antares is often working with customers. One of the barriers to entry with any data platform, so it's not just Fabric, but whenever you're building a unified data platform, one of the key challenges are, well, having multiple sources of data, being able to very quickly and easily ingest that data in, and then apply some sort of a semantic model on top of that so you can serve that to the business, right? And so as we've worked with many customers, over time, we've developed these tools and essentially a framework that is now open source that you can use to effectively accelerate or remove that barrier to entry, right? And we've designed a very simple high-level architecture here. I don't want to go into all the details here, but effectively the architecture helps you like a blueprint to overcome some of those barriers to entry and make it really easy and effective for you to be able to just point to a data source, ingest that data source in, and we provide you essentially a process for how you can create a common data model around all of your data sources that then you can serve as as data assets to the business. One of the key challenges here often we come across is, as I mentioned earlier, around legacy system access. So you might not have a system that even has API access or a database backend. It's a software that was written 30 years ago or 20 years ago, and it's difficult to access data within that system. So often, it's extraction of CSV files from that system and then manual manipulation of that data. So to overcome that and to be able to actually still move those data sets into Fabric, we have an approach here whereby we have a web application that you can serve to the business, which essentially allows business users to upload these manually handled files, so these CSV files, and it does some level of validation and pre-processing before it hits Fabric or before it hits your data management system. So what that does is effectively creates essentially a governance process around how your data is entering into the data management system, so that is in the right, in the correct form. And then we can use that data to then establish, additional reports or, provide quality reports back to the users. So the other thing that's included here is you can see this validation and cleanse. So we have some capability around saying, okay, well, we've got these data assets. We're going to pull them into Fabric, but one of our biggest issues is really data quality, right? And so you're able to actually, through the framework, build some data quality validation checks, which end up as a report in Power BI that can then be served back to the business. So what that means is you can really provide accountability for the business, but then provide them with the ability to actually cleanse their own data sets. Because previous to that, it took a lot of manual work to be able to do that. Now we can semi-automate that in a way where these Power BI reports effectively serve as their tool to be able to know where the issues are in their data, right? And so, and that's not just with CSV files, that can be with any data source. And, either the business can go back and fix those data sources, or we can apply some, more automated approaches to be able to do that, depending on, what those issues are, right? So there's different ways to tackle it. But ultimately here, essentially, we go through a fairly typical medallion structure. So we have a sort of initial landing zone, or a raw lake house, or a stage 1, or a bronze, whatever you want to call it. It's really just a place where we can store the incoming data in its original form. And then we move and transform that into a trusted lakehouse, which is, now validated for quality. It may have some quality checks and might have some pseudonymization, but ultimately it's a trusted source of data now. And then from there, we can start to really create data domains where effectively we might have, different business units using or working with their own sort of siloed data assets, which is often already the case. But then we're actually making those data assets available. So once you've gone through that quality and validation process, you can make those data assets available as endorsed data assets back to a corporate workspace. So that means that now you can build reports that pull information from, say, finance and combine that with your HR data. Or various other data assets are pulled into this aggregated view, and that means we can easily pull that data in, apply governance, so provide who's got access to that workspace, and then ultimately surface that up into Power BI reports, right? So that's really the key idea here is sort of separation of concerns, creating data domains that are specific, and providing the business with the accountability across those data domains, right? So very quickly, I do want to hand over to the other presenters as well, but just quickly, the security around Fabric, obviously using the latest and greatest Microsoft Intra IDs. We also have sort of conditional access policies. So security is really controlled at that storage level, where you can create, multiple conditional access policies to that storage, and ensure that your data is safe. I also get asked a lot of questions about, can I have various access controls across the different stages of the data lake? So, I might have developers that are working on the transformations of that data, but then, I might have different people that actually view and work with that data. So yes, you can. We can certainly have some security across various stages in the data lake as well. I won't get into the details, but the answer is yes, we can set that up in a way where, for very, very sensitive information, I guess, you can either do pseudonymization, which hashes out names and personal identifiable information, but developers are still able to do their transformation work, right? So there's ways to really at the granular level control security and governance as well. And then we also have, of course, the Azure Private Link as well. So, there is the ability to set up a VNet, which encompasses and provides that sort of private endpoint, which then, of course, can be connected to your OneLake as well. So just quickly, so some access controls I've already spoken a little bit about. If you're familiar with the Power BI access controls, this is again very, very similar. So we have OneLake. OneLake has workspaces with as containers, And typically a workspace would be, like I mentioned earlier, something like a finance workspace, or even within that, it might be a more granular, group of people that we're providing access to. And then inside each workspace, we have a set of lake houses, right? So, we have a set sort of architecture around how we do this, but this is quite flexible. You could have essentially a sort of medallion architecture within each workspace if you wanted to. It's really up to you. The point here is that you've got the ability to control at each level who's got access to where. As you can see on the screen, I'm able to set different types of security access, just like I had before in Power BI, to at the workspace level, lakehouse level, and even at the item level, to external users. So, I might have a situation where I've got a specific report or a specific lakehouse that is used for reporting, which is often what's called curated or stage 3, or the golden lakehouse, if you will. And that obviously then needs to be shared across to various users. And as you can see, we've got the ability to do that at the item level for users and user groups. Very quickly, just the last slide on Copilot. So this is probably one of my favorite technologies of late, apart from Fabric. And this Copilot, the one I'm talking about here, is specific to Power BI. Now, the reason I bring this up and how this ties back to data democratization is you now have the ability to provide accurate, validated data assets to the business, and the business can now ask questions from those data assets and get insights from those data assets without having to build a complex Power BI report, right? Now, not only that, not only can you ask questions and get your answers from that data asset, but you're actually able to build a report yourself. So one, we're pushing back that accountability of the data asset to the business, but we're also providing them with the tools to be able to build their own reports, right? So again, taking less, providing, taking more ownership and accountability from IT to be able to have to do that, and providing the tool sets to the business so that they can effectively use Copilot to build their own reports. Now, and it actually works quite well. Now, for more complex situations where you've got a more complicated set of reports that you want to build, you can still do that from an IT point of view. But for most situations where you've done the groundwork in terms of your data, your semantic model and your data validation, this could be a really good way to provide a heck of a lot of insight into for the business and provide them with the tools to be able to manage that themselves. So that's all from me at this point. I'm going to hand over to Jason and Essen and let them talk a little bit more detail.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Martin and Greg. My name's Jordan France. I'm the Data and AI Technical Specialist in our Tech for Social Impact team, working with Essen Naidu, who's our Data and AI lead. Just in the interest of time, I won't take up too much, but I'm really approaching this from the non-for-profit perspective. So I've had the pleasure of doing a lot of demonstrations and working a lot with our non-for-profit customers recently. Just to reiterate exactly what Martin and Greg have been talking about, is just that complexity that we see across data estates, with those siloed data sources across on-premise, across multiple vendors like Snowflake, AWS, for example. Just that time investment it takes across that pipeline and extensive integration required for that to consolidate it. Also having the data copies, across the estate multiple times. And just really for the smaller teams, all of that intensive administration required to manage across different services, meaning we just have less of that time to extract that value from the data, from the insights. So really, Fabric is just this unified platform aimed at creating a native experience for the business. So all of that ingestion of data, all of those insights natively connected together, with things like governance and Azure Purview natively integrated across that. So really aimed at reducing the complexity for the business to get from that ingestion to those insights, not only in reporting, but even things like generative AI and some of those more advanced use cases as well. Not to get technical, I think a lot of people would have seen, something similar to this. I think Martin and Greg went through this a bit, but, we have that traditional data loading, that we have, and we have all of the pipelines required. We have different services that are required across those steps. We have, complex needs and requirements to get from that left to right. In Fabric, we're really abstracting on top of that, giving you the customization, the flexibility of all of those, native Microsoft Azure services like Azure Data Factory, our data warehousing. But we're also wrapping that in not only the OneLake, but that, Azure Purview governance model with Copilot integrated as well. So, having come from myself, a data engineering, a data analyst background, having this native experience where I can one-click deploy and move data across environments, across workspaces, into valuable stores of data to get downstream into my reports, into my analytics, is incredible. And it really speeds up that time to value from that left to right, from ingesting that data or mirroring that data of on-premise data sources, other vendors, other databases we have available, to then go and use Copilot to write some scripts, to look at analytics, to develop a report, as Martin said. It is really just this unified central platform for the business that allows you to do more with less. I think one of the sort of the appreciated features or massive draw cards for Fabric is its integration with Azure AI Studio. I think a lot of people would know, and speaking from experience, that the true lifeblood of AI is your data. So unifying it and consolidating it to one platform, where we're not copying it, we're not replicating it, we're bringing it in to OneLake, allows you to feed this into your AI use cases, no matter where you are in your journey. Whether you haven't started that AI journey and that AI roadmap yet, whether you're just using Copilot, for example, or whether you can sort of see use cases, basic and advanced, coming over the next year, 2 years, you have your data here consolidated in Fabric. So when you do begin that journey, or when you do take on those advanced use cases like semantic querying your data, for example, your documents, or advanced chatbots, it's all here and natively integrated across the Fabric platform, which is fantastic. So just touching on that a bit more, having that central repository through OneLake is already amazing. I think that has huge benefits across the business, operationally, but it does feed into that preparation for that AI innovation, which I think we're seeing a lot of. We're seeing, great use cases at the moment, but thinking 2, 3, 4 years ahead with AI, it's not going anywhere. And I think having that huge boon to the business of having it in OneLake allows you then to go into that AI studio when you're ready in the future to start developing those advanced use cases for internal, people, or externally to your customers as well, which I think is fantastic. Something that Greg and Martin have touched on as well. I love seeing this. I think, bringing in your data from anywhere, right? Other open source databases, other vendors, and then allowing, your different personas in the business to use what they see fit, what they feel comfortable with, whether it's notebooks to query the data, whether it's SQL, whether it's Python, etc. And it's feeding into that, really unified, natively integrated services up the top there, which I think is fantastic. You're in one browser, you're doing one-click deployments, and it's just reducing that overhead that I feel like a lot of smaller teams really face. And that's some of the challenges I've talked a lot to customers about recently. And I think it's important to remember that we talk a lot about Azure and reusing what you've probably got in Azure already within Fabric, but it's connected to the whole Microsoft stack, across Power Platform, across Dynamics. We have a lot of customers with a lot of data in Dataverse, for example, which is fantastic, but we can now have a native connector to bring that data in, actually store it at a lower cost, but also start running analytics on top of that. So you're generating insights across all of your data estate, across Microsoft and other third-party applications. I think things like Power Apps, whether you're using them now or you see that you're going to be using them the next, few years, I think it's a fantastic platform to have that really enables you to consolidate all of this data across the organization. This is a bit of an information heavy slide. I'm actually not going to go, too deep into it. I think something Martin talked about before is personas. And something I've seen with a lot of non-for-profit teams is sometimes we don't have individual team members to be a data engineer, to be a data scientist, to be a data analyst. Often we have a lot of people wearing multiple hats. We have someone doing a lot of these roles together. And I think that the key here is that they have all of these tools at their disposal to quickly move from that left to right, that data ingestion, that medallion architecture into Copilot generated Power BI reports or easily accessible reports across the organization. It's been designed from the ground up to facilitate all of those roles and wearing those different hats. And I think that plays even more into the future AI strategy of your business and the investment Microsoft is making in AI and within Fabric to enable your business to do that. And another big conversation I've been having with a lot of customers recently is just around governance. I think it's top of mind for everyone as we really treat data as an asset. One of Fabric's huge, I think, draw cards as well is not only does it integrate with a lot of really market-leading third-party data governance tool out there, but you actually get a free license for Microsoft Purview within Fabric. And it's really built from the ground up. It's built natively into that to do things like data cataloging, data lineage, data quality across your entire organization. And that's really fueled by OneLake. You have one copy of the data, meaning we haven't got silos of the same data, people accessing old, deprecated data, things like that. It is truly sort of that real-time snapshot of your data estate, which I think is something a lot of people have been extremely impressed with and interested in. And just to go on that a little bit further, it has really been designed from the ground up with that in mind. So organization level policies, organizational level metadata, cataloging feeds right into Microsoft Fabric and those different workspaces that Martin talked about, different business units. It's applied at that level so that we have a cohesive strategy for our business, which I think is fantastic. Just in the interest of time, I think I'll hand it back. But yeah, thank you very much for having me. And yeah, looking forward to talking more about Fabric with everyone. Essen, did you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, just before the Antares guys get into the assessment piece, I just wanted to say I think Fabric is a huge opportunity for non-for-profits who are starting out that don't have an existing analytics platform in place. I think that's where we see the most potential for organizations. It's a low-cost entry to a full unified analytics platform and quicker time to insights. And we're seeing that happen in a few conversations we're having already with non-for-profits and specifically in the aged care sector as well. So yeah, very keen to kick off some discussions. If feel free to send us an email or get in contact with us, but I'll pass it over to the Antares team just to discuss the sort of next steps from what we've discussed today. Thanks, Jordan.
Thanks.
Thanks, Jordan. Thanks, Essen. Great to see the excitement and passion coming through in the Fabric conversation. I think it's a real big game changer in this space, and I think that's what's getting us all, invigorated, excited about how technology is changing from the Microsoft viewpoint, how they're coming to the table with the new products and features, which are really going to bring together. And I think Jordan touched on it really well in terms of how it unifies all your different platforms together under the one ecosystem. And I think that's important when you look at your security posture and your governance aspect. But the question often is, it's all fair and well, the technology is great, but where do we start? How do we move forward from here? What does that look like? And what are the things that we should think about? And what are the things that we need to be very mindful of when it comes to, understanding our path? And every path is unique and different. So from Antares' perspective, we, position and come to the table with a very clear, knowledge built, experience built assessment on Fabric. We look at assessing the various vision, missions, and objectives of the business. We look at the stakeholders and we sit down and we work through, what are the key systems, peoples, and processes that are important. And like I touched on earlier in the webinar, we understand a bit more about the ways of working and the important aspects of how staff, frontline workers, programs are run, what is needed, how is that information needed to be surfaced from a data perspective. We explore the different bits and pieces around your architecture and what's going to work. I think that's that really important piece. When do these reports need to be run? How do we manage and optimize those sort of aspects so that we can take on board the best way to price optimize and deploy an architecture that's tailored to your own requirements as an organization, and come with that data strategy around also the operational ongoing. What does the data culture look like in the organization? How do we go forward in a way knowing that people understand who are the important roles, data custodians, those sorts of aspects, and then value the data moving forward and trust the data more importantly. So we have a various sort of set of approaches to this, and depending on the organization, some need a more detailed requirement around the assessment to really unpack everything. There's a lot more stakeholders, there's a lot more complexity. Whereas some can actually sort of come to it and go, okay, what we're actually really doing is just starting out in our journey. We really just need to start to lay down the foundations of how to go forward. So we do have a rapid, assessment in this space. It's 10 hours of face-to-face consulting, which involves workshops, interviews, and really a lot more thought leadership and deep dive and discovery around that. Offline, we then take that forward and bring that out in a report, in which we present back around, the ways forward, which talks to, how's it going to benefit your business? What are the sort of use cases? What is the priority use case today that surfaces up out of everything? Because there's often 1, 2, or 3 real key use cases. And that allows us to take you forward on that journey in a way that you're very clear about where you'd start, what does it look like, and what are the considerations, people enablement, training enablement, end users, those sort of aspects, as well as security and those aspects around governance and compliance as well. So there are often regulatory and other report requirements we need to manage. So we try to surface up all of that and take forward a very sort of holistic but comprehensive high-level presentation, that free rapid assessment. And we do have the other options available if you're interested in something a little more in-depth as well. So feel free, but we are offering those for free for the first 3 NFPs I want to call that are interested in registering for those as well. So reach out to us. We will probably just give you a courtesy reach out as well after this session, just to make sure that if there's any other questions or follow-ups, we're happy to facilitate that as well. So I will, coming up to 5 minutes before ends, stop there and just sort of open up the floor to any questions from anyone, either what they might have heard or seen today, and any other particular areas of interest or note. Whilst you've got Microsoft and Antares on the call, you've got the ability to sort of pick a few brains. So if there's anything, please feel free to raise a hand or pop it in the chat window, and we're more than happy to sort of facilitate questions.
Greg, there was a question here from Adil just around the differences between Snowflake and Synapse and Databricks and Fabric and all of that, and I sort of skimmed across that because we didn't have a lot of time to expand on a lot of detail. But just to give you a bit of flavor, so I guess from a Databricks perspective, you may know that Spark, a lot of the original Spark developers actually work at Databricks, and in terms of Spark performance and development, they're quite honestly they're ahead of the curve. And Synapse has done a really good job of catching up in terms of that Spark development as well. But really, from a Databricks perspective, the question I often ask is, how complex and how large are your data workloads, right? So to me, unless you're a bank or a mining company and you're dealing with terabytes of data, and you really require that extra 5-10% of performance, obviously at a cost, then it's not really a worthwhile approach. And what Fabric brings to the table is, of course, this integration. And we talked about personas, but it's really an integration of different capabilities, including Power BI. That's really interesting because it allows you to effectively manage everything from the one platform, create one governance and security, one storage, and then ultimately just provide the slices or components in that one platform to the various people. So it's really built with that data democratization in mind, and really providing that accountability and control back to the business. Whereas if you're using a sort of Databricks or a Snowflake, you still have requirements, even though they're SaaS platforms, you still have requirements for reporting and sort of controlling that that integration between pieces. So I think from that perspective, Fabric is kind of the future approach to data management, and takes that sort of simplified approach to be able to provide those things to the business. So I think that for me, for any business that's sort of SMB and not a bank, not a mining company, then that's a much better approach and a much better bang for your buck as well.
Thanks, Marty. It's a good point to note as well. And it's similar to the question around sort of pricing and consumption. I think you touched on it earlier, Marty, one of your slides where you showed the engineering and reporting capacities, how you set them up and how you schedule those to run has an impact on your pricing as well, and can actually be optimized to ensure pricing is managed. So I think they're things when we look at it, they're information that we've gleaned over the last 6 months or so of looking and working through Fabric with customers. The cost optimization is often an important question, more so important in NFP when it comes to doing more with less when it comes to investment funds for OPEX and those sorts of areas of investment from an IT perspective. So we look at how to best optimize those reports, how to best optimize engineering capacities, how to run and sequence them in ways and in times, put them to sleep when they're not needed, run reports in a way that if they do, use a little bit more than the capacity you've allocated, it's fine. It still stays within your pricing banner. It just means that throttling doesn't happen at a time when business users might be using those reports as well. There's definitely ways in which you can set it up to be, cost advantageous from a licensing and optimization perspective, as well as from an execution to ensure that, during your critical times of 9 to 5 and those sort of hours, end users still get access to timely reports without being throttled. And at times where you may want to run those more heavier workloads within your capacity, you could run them at slightly off jumped times to ensure that any throttling happens, has the minimal, if not zero, impact to users as well. So there are things there that we can talk offline as well. And I think Essen touched on it as well. We're more than happy to sort of take any of those more deep dive conversations into, an offline sort of conversation or workshop, or we can talk through specific aspects as well. Okay, I feel coming up to time now, and if there's any other questions or anything else, we will share the recording and the slides out. I'll make them available for everyone as well. Again, feel free to reach out to Essen or Jordan, myself or Marty, and we're more than happy to facilitate any offline conversations or jump on a call and talk through. We did cover a lot today, and there's specific aspects which may not be relevant to all NFPs, but there's definitely going to be a lot of overlap for a lot of NFPs around some of the pain points, especially solo datas and those sort of things. And when we start talking about I think Jordan touched on it, the ability to surface data using shortcuts into your one lake without having to ingest that full data, particular source system, it means you're starting to see that there's a capability here to get the data you need in an environment you need, trusted, safe, secure, without having to do the old school large big data programs of data migration all into one source system. So a lot more flexibility than we've ever had. Copilot brings in a whole new level of capability as well, especially the ability for engineers to use Copilot and be able to help craft SQL queries and those sorts of things. Similar to Jordan back in the days on the tools, you'd spend a lot of time searching, trying to find the best way to optimize your own query. Now with Copilot for data engineering, you've got the ability as it comes through to be able to really optimize your own skills and do a lot more for less with a lot less overhead. So to Marty's point earlier, IT and data administrators can surface reports to business without that sort of background, operational overhead of going, well, we've got a backlog, we can't get through it all in time. Now we're going to get the tools to be able to allow you to surface that data and give the people the potential and capacity to do that as well, without sort of sitting there chasing your tail as a data or IT department. So as we wind up, I think thanks for everyone for joining. Hopefully you've all found the session useful. Big thank you to Essen and to Jordan, as well as Marty, who co-presented from Antares. Feel free to reach out to us if there's anything that you want to find out about, and we're more than happy to look at understanding how we can help you. Thank you all.
Thank you.